He had 11 minutes to make it. He chose to save a stranger instead. No one else moved. He didn't even think twice. 10 seconds. That's all it took to save her life and lose everything he'd worked for. 7 minutes late. One rule, one rejection.
If you had 30 seconds to choose between your entire future and a stranger's life, what would you do? Daniel Carter had less than 10. Before you find out what he chose, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story about to change how you think about second chances. Daniel Carter was 37 years old, and for the last 4 years he had been raising his daughter alone. His wife Emily had died in a car accident when their daughter Lily was only 3, and since that day, Daniel had learned to do everything: braid hair he didn't understand, cook meals he'd never made, and hold back tears at bedtime so a little girl wouldn't see her father break. He worked as a freelance graphic designer from a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Denver, taking whatever contracts he could find, watching his savings shrink a little more every month. Rent was due in 6 days. The refrigerator held half a carton of eggs and a jar of peanut butter. And today, for the first time in 11 months, Daniel had an interview that could change everything. Meridian Dynamics was one of the fastest-growing design and technology firms on the West Wind. And somehow, after 3 rounds of online screening, they had invited him to their downtown office for a final, in-person interview for the position of Senior Creative Director. The salary alone would be more than double what he made now. Health insurance, stability, a real bedroom for Lily instead of a pull-out couch in the living room. Daniel had ironed his only good shirt 3 times the night before, rehearsed his answers in the bathroom mirror, and promised his daughter that tonight they would celebrate with her favorite pizza, no matter what happened. He had applied to Meridian on a whim 11 weeks earlier, half convinced his portfolio would disappear into the same silence as the 40 other applications he'd sent that year. When the first email came back requesting a phone screen, he'd read it 4 times standing in his kitchen, certain it was a mistake. When the second round asked for a full case study presentation, he'd stayed up past midnight 3 nights in a row, polishing slides between freelance deadlines, terrified of wasting the one shot that finally seemed real. By the time the final round was scheduled, Daniel had stopped telling himself not to hope. Hope, it turned out, was harder to kill than he expected, even after everything the last 4 years had taken from him. The grief had never fully left him, not in 4 years. Some nights, he still reached for Emily's side of the bed before remembering, in that first groggy second of waking, that it had been empty for a very long time. He kept a photo of her on his desk, tucked beside his monitor, not as a shrine, but as a quiet kind of company, while he worked through the night on projects that paid too little and asked too much. Lily barely remembered her mother. She knew her only through photographs and the stories Daniel told at bedtime, stories he was careful to keep warm and soft, never sad, because he had decided early on that his daughter's childhood would not be built on his grief. It would be built on stability, on routine, on a father who showed up every single day, even when showing up cost him everything he had left. That morning had felt different from the start. Daniel woke before his alarm, made Lily's favorite waffles instead of the usual toast, and let her pick out his tie, even though the interview didn't call for one. A small superstition, a shared ritual of luck. "You look like a superhero, Daddy," she told him, patting down his collar with far more seriousness than a 7-year-old should possess. He laughed, scooped her up despite his bad back protesting, and told her that whatever happened today, she was still the best thing he had ever made. He dropped Lily off at his neighbor Mrs. Alvarez's apartment at 8:15 that morning. Mrs. Alvarez was a retired schoolteacher in her 60s who had appointed herself the unofficial grandmother of the building, and she squeezed Daniel's hand before he left. "You've got this," she said. "That little girl of yours needs to see her daddy shine today." Daniel smiled, kissed Lily's forehead, and told her he loved her more than all the stars combined, their little ritual since she was a baby. Then he got into his aging silver sedan and merged onto the interstate, his heart hammering with a mixture of hope and terror. The interview was scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m. sharp, and Meridian's HR policy as the recruiter Rebecca Chen had reminded him twice, was brutally strict. Candidates who were even 5 minutes late would be automatically disqualified. No exceptions, because the CEO herself sat in on every final round, and her schedule allowed for zero flexibility. Daniel had left with over an hour to spare, mapping an alternate route in case of traffic. He was, by every measure, prepared. Then, 6 blocks from the Meridian building, everything changed. He was stopped at a red light on a quiet side street when he saw her. A woman in an expensive gray blazer stumbling out of a parking garage, one hand clutching her throat, her face rapidly draining of color. She dropped to her knees on the sidewalk, and for a horrifying second, Daniel thought she had simply tripped. Then he saw her lips beginning to swell, her breathing turning into a high, panicked wheeze. Anaphylaxis. He recognized the signs instantly, because Lily's daycare had once made every parent sit through an allergy emergency training session, and the memory of that class came roaring back to him now, uninvited and absolute. Nobody else on the sidewalk moved. A few pedestrians slowed to stare, phones half raised, but no one stepped forward. Daniel didn't think. He didn't calculate the minutes. He threw the car into park in the middle of the street, ignored the blaring horn behind him, and sprinted across the road. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Do you have an EpiPen?" he shouted, kneeling beside her. The woman's eyes were wide with terror, her hand weakly pawing at her purse, which had spilled its contents across the pavement. Daniel dug through lipstick, a phone, a company badge that flashed silver letters he didn't have time to read, until his fingers closed around a small yellow auto-injector. His hands were shaking, but 4 years of being a single father had taught him how to move fast and crouch steady at the exact same time. He pressed the EpiPen to her outer thigh, held it for the 10 seconds he remembered from that daycare class, and prayed. The woman gasped, a raw, ragged breath tearing back into her lungs. Her eyes rolled, unfocused, and Daniel caught her before her head could strike the concrete. "Stay with me," he said, cradling her against his shoulder, his iron shirt now streaked with sidewalk dust. "Someone call 911. Now." A stranger finally snapped into action, dialing with trembling fingers. Daniel kept talking to the woman in a low, steady voice, the same voice he used when Lily woke from nightmares, telling her she was safe, that help was coming, that she just needed to breathe. The ambulance took 11 minutes to arrive. 11 minutes that Daniel spent monitoring her pulse, keeping her airway clear, refusing to leave her side, even as the woman drifted in and out of consciousness. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a clock was ticking toward 10 o'clock. But he refused to let himself look at it again. He counted her breaths instead. In, hold, out, the same counting trick he used to calm Lily during thunderstorms. A small crowd had gathered by then, murmuring, filming, useless in the particular way crowds so often are, and Daniel found himself shielding the woman from their phones with his own body, an instinct he didn't stop to question. When the paramedics finally lifted her onto a stretcher, one of them, a broad-shouldered man named James, gripped Daniel's shoulder. "Whatever you did, man, you saved her life. Another 2 or 3 minutes, and it would have been over. You did everything right." Daniel nodded, adrenaline still roaring through his veins. And only then did he look at his watch. 10:07 a.m. He was already 7 minutes late for the most important interview of his life. 6 blocks and a world away. He ran back to his car, weaving through the gathering crowd, and drove the remaining distance in a blur. But he already knew. When he burst through Meridian's glass doors at 10:19, disheveled, his shirt streaked with dirt and dried blood from where he'd scraped his palm on the pavement, Rebecca Chen was waiting for him at the front desk, with an expression of practiced, professional sympathy. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry." The panel had to move forward with the other candidates. "Company policy, I did try to hold your slot as long as I could." Daniel didn't argue. What could he say? That he'd been on the ground with a stranger, pressing a needle into her leg, because there had been no one else to do it? It sounded like an excuse even to him. He simply nodded, thanked her for her time, and walked back out into the gray Denver morning with his future crumbling quietly behind him. That night, he told Lily the interview hadn't worked out, but he didn't tell her why. He didn't want her to think saving a life had been a mistake, even though a hollow, exhausted part of him wondered if it had cost him everything. They ate cereal for dinner instead of pizza, and he read her 2 extra chapters of her favorite book to make up for the disappointment. Neither of them spoke aloud. After she fell asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a stack of unpaid bills and tried himself cry for the first time in months. Not for the job, but for the crushing, familiar fear of not being enough. 3 days passed. Daniel sent out 11 more applications and heard nothing. He picked up 2 freelance logo projects that paid a fraction of what he needed. Mrs. Alvarez brought over a casserole just because, which both of them knew was really because she'd overheard him on the phone with the landlord. His best friend Marcus, a mechanic who had known Daniel since college, called every evening that week, ostensibly to talk about a truck he was rebuilding, but really to make sure Daniel was still eating and still sleeping and still, in whatever quiet way a grieving single father could, still fighting. "You did the right thing," Marcus told him on the 3rd night. Static crackling faintly on the line from the garage. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, sitting there staring at those bills. But you did the right thing, and one day that's going to matter more than a job title." Daniel wanted to believe him. Some nights he almost did. But he kept telling himself that things would turn around, that the universe didn't know. But Daniel was starting to lose faith in that particular philosophy. What Daniel didn't know was that the woman he had saved was Olivia Bennett, 34 years old, and the founder and CEO of Meridian Dynamics, the very company that had turned him away that morning. Olivia had been rushed to Denver General, treated for a severe reaction to shellfish hidden in a catering dish from a lunch meeting, and had spent 2 days recovering, furious with herself for not carrying a spare EpiPen, and haunted by the memory of a stranger's steady voice telling her she was safe. When she was discharged, the first thing she did was ask the hospital and the police for any information about the man who had stopped traffic to save her. It took her assistant, Grace, less than a day to track him down through a combination of a 911 dispatch log and a security camera from a nearby coffee shop that had caught his license plate. When Grace pulled up Daniel Carter's name, Olivia went very still. She recognized it immediately. It was the exact name Rebecca Chen had flagged in her weekly report as the no-show candidate for the senior creative director position, a candidate whose portfolio Olivia herself had specifically requested to see because his work was, in her words, the most human design I've reviewed all year. The man who had missed his interview because he was too busy saving her life was the same man her own company had quietly disqualified for being 7 minutes late. Olivia didn't sleep that night. She sat in her downtown apartment, scrolling through Daniel's vast portfolio again. Logos for small nonprofits, a branding package he'd done for free for a children's cancer charity, a hand-lettered card he'd apparently designed for his own daughter's birthday that had somehow ended up in his public files. She thought about corporate policy, about the rigid, efficient systems she herself had built to keep Meridian running like clockwork, and for the first time in years, she wondered if efficiency had cost her something important. The next morning, without telling her board, without warning Rebecca, Olivia Bennett got into her car and drove to the address Grace had found, a modest apartment complex on the edge of the heavy city. She knocked, dressed down in jeans and a plain white blouse instead of her usual tailored blazer, wanting, for once, to be seen as a person rather than a title. Daniel opened the door, in a paint-stained t-shirt, Lily peeking out from behind his legs, with a crayon still in her hand. And for a moment, he simply stared, not recognizing the woman from the sidewalk without the panic, and the pallor and the blood rushing back into her face. "You saved my life," Olivia said simply, "and I let my company throw you away for it. I came to fix that, if you'll let me." Daniel was too stunned to speak. Lily, unbothered by the tension adults so often create out of nothing, asked if the pretty lady wanted to see her drawing of a dinosaur eating pizza, and somehow that small, absurd moment of a 7-year-old confidence broke the ice better than anything else could have. Olivia laughed, a real, surprised laugh, and knelt down to admire the drawing with genuine delight. And Daniel felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in days. Still, when Olivia finally made her offer, Daniel hesitated longer than she expected. Part of him, the proud, wounded part that had spent 4 years refusing anyone's pity, bristled at the idea of being hired out of gratitude rather than merit. However she framed it, "I don't want a job because I happen to be in the right place at the wrong time," he told her quietly. Once Lily had wandered back to her crayons. "I want it because my work is good enough. If it isn't, I'd rather know that now." Olivia studied him for a long moment, something like respect flickering across her face. And then she pulled up his portfolio on her phone, right there in his cramped living room, and pointed to the non-profit branding work, the hand-lettered birthday card, the case study he'd built for the final round he never got to present. "I flagged your portfolio before I knew your name," she said. "Before the sidewalk. Before any of it. This isn't charity, Mr. Carter. This is me correcting a system that almost cost me the best hire I've seen in years, for a reason that had nothing to do with your talent." That, finally, was something Daniel could accept. Olivia explained everything: who she was, what had happened after the ambulance took her away, how she'd spent 3 sleepless nights realizing that the policies she was so proud of had almost cost her the one employee whose portfolio had actually moved her. She offered him the senior creative director position on the spot, not out of guilt, she insisted, but because his work deserved it, regardless of what had happened on that sidewalk. But not everyone at Meridian was pleased. Jonathan Reyes, a senior board member who had long pushed for Meridian to professionalize and tighten its hiring practices, saw Olivia's decision as reckless favoritism, a dangerous precedent that could unravel the very policies that had made the company function so smoothly. He had spent 3 years building the strict, no-exceptions hiring framework that had just been overturned in a single afternoon, and he did not take the news quietly. In a heated closed-door meeting, he argued that hiring a candidate outside of process, however sympathetic the story, would demoralize a hiring team that had followed every rule exactly as instructed. He even went so far as to quietly request Daniel's full background check be expedited, half hoping to find some disqualifying detail that would settle the matter cleanly, some proof that this was simply another example of the company's choose founder letting emotion override judgment. He found nothing but 4 years of a man paying rent on time, raising a daughter alone, and doing free design work for a children's hospital in his spare hours, which, infuriatingly, only made his argument harder to win. "You're the CEO, not a fairy godmother," he told her bluntly, sliding the clean background report across the table. "This is a business, Olivia, not a charity." Olivia refused to back down. She called an all-staff town hall, something Meridian had never done for a single hire before, and stood in front of nearly 400 employees to tell them the truth, not a sanitized press release, but the real story of a stranger who chose to miss the biggest opportunity of his life, to full save someone he had never met, expecting nothing in return, not even a thank you. She described the sidewalk, the panic, the sound of his voice telling her she was safe when she couldn't breathe, and then, without flinching, she described what her own company had done to him 7 minutes later. A rejection letter dressed up as policy. She told them that a company obsessed with rigid efficiency had almost punished the very kind of character it should have been searching for all along, and that no metric on any dashboard she had ever built could measure what Daniel Carter had done on that sidewalk. "If we are a company that would have fired him for being late to save my life," she said, her voice steady but her eyes bright, "then we are not the company I set out to build, and today, we start building a better one." By the time she finished speaking, the room was silent, and then it wasn't. First one person, then dozens, then the entire room rose to their feet in applause. Even Jonathan, arms crossed at the back of the room, found himself nodding, quietly recalculating what kind of company he actually wanted to help build. Within the week, he would be the one to propose the human discretion clause formally to the board, a fact that surprised no one more than himself. Daniel started at Meridian Dynamics 2 weeks later. The first project he led was, at his own request, a complete redesign of the company's emergency and hiring policies, adding a human discretion clause that Olivia herself championed in board meetings. A small, permanent reminder that no rulebook should ever be more important than a person's life. Rebecca Chen, once the reluctant messenger of his rejection, became one of his closest allies in the office, and often joked that she owed him a very long apology and an even longer lunch. Life did not transform overnight into some flawless fairy tale. There were still late nights, still moments of doubt, still the ordinary friction of a single father adjusting to unfamiliar boardrooms. But rent was no longer a monthly terror. Lily got her own real bedroom, painted the exact shade of purple she'd been begging for since she was 5. Mrs. Alvarez cried actual tears of joy the day Daniel told her the news, and Marcus took him out to celebrate at the best diner either of them could actually afford for once. And Olivia, who had built an empire on discipline and precision, found herself, almost against her will, drawn back to that apartment again and again, first with paperwork, then with takeout, then simply because Lily had started requesting the pretty lady with the dinosaur drawings at bedtime stories. What began as gratitude slowly, carefully, became something neither of them rushed to name, built not on the drama of that sidewalk, but on quiet Tuesday dinners and a little girl's unguarded trust. Months later, at a small company gathering, Olivia stood before her team once more, this time not to explain a controversial decision, but to announce Meridian's new community foundation, funded entirely from her own bonus, dedicated to training ordinary people in emergency first aid. Free classes, open to the public, no corporate strings attached. She asked Daniel to help design the branding. He said yes before she'd even finished the sentence. Somewhere in that boardroom, 7-year-old Lily sat coloring at a side table, utterly unaware that her father's one impulsive, selfless decision on a random Tuesday morning had rippled out to reshape not just their own small family, but an entire company's understanding of what truly mattered. She had grown used to the new office by then, to the friendly security guard who saved her stickers, to Rebecca, who always kept a spare juice box in her desk drawer just for her, to the corner of Olivia's office where a small dinosaur drawing had been framed and hung, slightly crooked, beside a wall of design awards. Daniel never once regretted missing that interview, because in the end, he hadn't lost his dream that day. He had simply discovered a bigger one, waiting 6 blocks and 1 stranger away. Years from now, when Lily is old enough to understand the full weight of what happened that gray Tuesday morning, Daniel plans to tell her the whole story, unfiltered, not as a fairy tale about a CEO and a hero, but as a simple truth he wants her to carry for the rest of her life. That kindness is never actually a detour from your path, even when it feels that way in the moment. Sometimes it simply is the path, quietly rerouting you towards something better than the plan you were so desperately clutching. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The smallest acts of kindness, the ones we never expect anyone to notice, are sometimes the exact moments that quietly rewrite our entire future. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that good things still find their way back to good people.